Well, let me start. Thanks very much for coming. If you're like myself and Representative Harmsworth, the most consistent email and call we get is, when are you going to reduce our car tab taxes? It hasn't waned, at least in our worlds, it hasn't waned since last year. So it seemed prudent for us to have this press conference with deadlines coming on moving bills out of their chambers of origin. In the Senate Transportation Committee, where I sit, there are two critical bills dealing with this issue and a third that hasn't even been heard yet that I'm calling on the good Senator Hobbs to move out of committee. The first, of course, is 6303. That is the only real car tab tax reduction, not only in my view, but in the view of my constituents when I describe my bill and the proposals put forth by the Democrats. There's less than enthusiastic support for the Democratic bill. My bill would reduce the car tab tax by 55%. It would base that car tab tax on real market value, Kelley Blue Book, using a basic model for that purpose. The other the other option that we hear so much about and that the Democrats have shown every indication that they're going to move would just provide meager relief to taxpayers. Representative Cliburn, the chair of House Transportation, characterized their bill as resulting in about $40 to $50 max for the average taxpayer. I can tell you that is not going to cut it. I've got emails and letters from constituents who are talking about $200, $500. I even met a gentleman whose RV car tab tax increased for the RTA by $2,000 over previous years. 40, 50 bucks is not going to cut it. There's basically two paradigms down here when it comes to the car tab tax relief. There's one that says, let's do as little as possible, protect sound transit, but pretend as if we're doing something that we can pass off as tax relief. I'm not interested in that paradigm. I'm interested in the paradigm that actually brings real relief to taxpayers who felt bamboozled by what they heard about ST3. I've got people who tell me they voted for ST3 and they deeply regret it. They didn't understand from the material from Sound Transit that they were going to be paying this much in their car tab tax relief. There are sort of two themes in those responses that I get from constituents. The first is they see no real value, no connection between this dramatic tax increase in their car tab fees and what they're getting for it. They either realize they're going to wait until some of them are dead before Sound Transit light rail ever comes to Pierce County, or they know they're hardly ever going to ride it because their lives don't in any way connect with a Seattle job or a Seattle reason for traveling north in the case of Pierce. And so in their mind, they're saying, why am I being asked to pay for this? And then why are you basically putting this substantial burden on my principal means of transportation, my vehicle? That makes no sense to them. Why do I have to pay more for the only way that I can get around to support a form of transit that I'll never use? It's a pretty good argument. It's a pretty big concern. The second thing I'm saying is that it's poisoned taxpayers' willingness to support other taxes that they may be asked to in the form of levies or bonds and the like. They feel like government is disconnected from them, and they wonder why they have to keep paying more and more for something like ST3 that doesn't connect with their lives. I have examples of that. I can share those later once we're done. But we need to listen as a legislature. After all, we're directly elected by our people to be responsive to their needs. So that's the first obvious form of of relief and accountability that we have got to move in this legislative session, and we simply can't wait till next year. And the Democratic option is just not going to cut it. The second is another major theme for me, and that's been the accountability or lack of accountability with Sound Transit. We're in this place because Sound Transit is not responsive to taxpayers. It's insulated from that important democratic mechanism of direct elections because the Sound Transit Board, as you know, is appointed by county executives, and one county executive, Dow Constantine, gets to appoint a majority of those board members. We are not going to have the kind of accountability and an opportunity to rebuild the trust the taxpayers need in Sound Transit until they feel like they have the opportunity to directly impact policy through direct elections. And my bill 6301, again, seems to be bottled up in Senate Transportation. I've urged Senator Hobbs to move that bill along. It passed off the Senate floor last year 3 times, with the first time with Democratic support. So we need to move that along because we are never going to get at this problem with Sound Transit and its lack of responsiveness and interest in taxpayers until we have direct elections. The third, and I'm almost done, the third bill that I couldn't even get a hearing on, and it goes to the accountability problem, is as you know, Sound Transit has at least $54 billion to spend on these projects. But if they don't complete those projects on time and within budget, and frankly, it has a very bad history of doing so, they don't have to come back to taxpayers. They can just keep on taxing us and spending until they finally complete these projects. That was a mistake of the legislature. We have to correct that mistake. And I have legislation that hasn't been heard that would require Sound Transit to go back to taxpayers if it looks like they're going to exceed their grandiose $54 billion budget that they have. So I'll stop at that. With that, let Senator or Representative Harmsworth make his comments, and then we can open it up for questions.
Yeah, and just to build on what Senator Ban has been talking about, I also have been hearing very clearly from my constituents about these tabs. A lot of these folks are pro-transit, and they voted and they supported ST3. But when that bill showed up and said, hey, this is going to be $1, $2, $3, $4, $500 more than they were expecting, they're outraged, and they should be too, because the agency that's out of control, I mean, this is the agency that has these $100,000 parking spots down in Pierce County. It has these parties, $1 million parties for opening these train stations. It has no accountability. $54 billion. They came down to us and asked us for $15 billion in front of the legislature, and then went out and got $54 billion based on this other valuation schedule. And so the bills that Senator Ban has, we have companions in the House that match, which are also not moving. We have moved a bill out, which we moved out last year, not once, but twice, 3 times, which is 2201. It gives a very small amount of relief, so instead of a $500 increase, you may see a $450 increase. And the average person who's just trying to make it every day can't afford that. If you have a couple of cars, that is a huge amount of money for something that you may never be able to use or will not arrive. And we've got a lot of new technology that's coming down the pipe with autonomous vehicles and these types of things. And so this really is yesterday's technology, and we're investing huge amounts of money into this with an unaccountable agency. There is another bill that's going to go through the House for what's called the RTA tax boundary bill, which I sponsored in 1958. We've had a hearing in the Senate. It's a Hobbs bill in the Senate, and we're hoping to see that go through as well. That's moving slowly, but that gives relief for some voters that who are not able to vote on the RTA tax boundary, which is ironic. That's taxation without representation, and that needs to stop as well. So without beleaguering the point, we've got a problem here that there is an unwillingness to fix, and we need to move these bills forward and get real relief, real reductions for these car tabs, and have Sound Transit come back to us and be accountable to the people, this legislature, for what they're doing. I don't want to see another nickel wasted until that happens. And with that, I guess we're going to open it up for questions.
Questions?
Representative Harmsworth,
Yeah.
You voted for the 2201.
Yes.
Now you sit disgruntled by that.
Well, I supported 2201 because I'll take what I can get. If I can get 10% back for now while we continue working on this, I'll absolutely do that. I'm not going to go home with nothing. But it's not enough, which is the point that we're trying to make here is we need to continue working on this issue and pushing forwards to find real relief for our constituents.
Senator O'Bannon, in a statement just a moment ago, Senator Hogg points out that you voted 3 times to authorize Sound Transit to collect car fees in this way, and he says what you're doing is basically buyer's remorse.
So as I've said before on that point, I certainly did support the total tax package because, number one, it resulted in $500 million to broaden I-5 along the JBLM corridor. Secondly, as you know, when we were told that Sound Transit needed taxing authority, they said we need up to $15 billion. This was the subject of our investigation over the last couple of months. Everything they said in writing and verbally to us is all we need is $15 billion, authorize that amount. No sooner had we voted on the bill that they then changed their tune and started going to the voters for $54 billion. Secondly, I've been around here now for about 4.5 years. I would an informed guess be about 20% of what we do is correcting some mistake of the legislature in the previous year or previous years. This was a mistake, and there's nothing new or different about trying to correct that mistake, and that's what I'm trying to do here.
So Senator Hobbs also says he wants a bipartisan solution to this. He's not necessarily embracing 2201, but he wants a bipartisan approach at this point. And he's calling your response, let me read it here, unthoughtful, your bills are unthoughtful sledgehammers.
It's directed to me?
To you.
Okay. Well, I think, unfortunately, as much respect as I have for Senator Hobbs, I would unfortunately have to put him in the first paradigm that I mentioned. He and his colleagues on the other side of the aisle tend to be more protectionist of Sound Transit rather than more concerned about taxpayers. Mine is not a sledgehammer. Mine is real car tax relief. You talk to voters, you talk to taxpayers. They're not interested in $40 like Senator Hobbs' solution. They're interested in real relief, and my bill is the only one which would provide real relief to taxpayers.
When we talked about this last year with you, same topic, of the side of the chamber, you were in the driver's seat. You had every opportunity to get your bills passed and a solution. Now you're not. Now you're in the minority. Representative Harmsworth has been in the minority. They say this is just a stunt, that you have no power to make a change. Why are you even doing this?
If you don't, I'll respond to that. If a stunt is giving back real money to the people of this state, then yes, it's a stunt, because it isn't. And when this was heard in front of the Senate committee, there was ridicule placed on the people that came down to testify on behalf of the citizens of this state about real car relief. And we're not getting any traction on this. And that's the point. This isn't a stunt. These are real people's lives. There's real dollars involved here. And just a little tiny amount given back, while we'll take it, is just not enough.
Let me just supplement to that good response. If there's one thing to be carried away from this news conference and the bills that I put forward, and the fact that those bills passed off a Senate floor at the time controlled by my party, by the Republican Party, there is a real difference between the two parties when it comes to the size of government and the burden that sometimes creates on taxpayers. I want to provide, and my party wants to provide, real relief to taxpayers when they have been saddled with an unacceptable burden like this tax is. That's the difference, and it's certainly a difference that is being highlighted by the fact that the new Democrat chair holds these bills and won't even allow them to reach the Senate floor.
What would be the effect, 55% cut on Sound Transit's ability to continue with these projects?
So we had actually done a public records request when we wanted to find out what was their budget assumptions when it came to the kind of car tax relief that we were advocating. Their initial set of assumptions and response put our calculation at a $4 billion impact if my bill were to be passed. Remember, we don't require them to defease the bonds. This is a rebate approach, much like Representative Pellicotti's bill. We did borrow that piece from, we're bipartisan in that respect from Representative Pellicotti. So the range I've seen, the estimates I've seen is anywhere from $4 to $6 billion. Ladies and gentlemen, they have $54 billion. They can afford it. My constituents can't.
But do you know for a fact that Sound Transit will be able to get light rail to Tacoma if your 55% cut goes through?
Well, let's see. If they don't, they'll just keep taxing us, won't they? Because there's nothing to stop them. There's no forcing mechanism to keep them from continuing their taxation as far as the eye can see.
Do either of you, on that line, there's concern, Sound Transit's expressed concern that even a bill that did pass the House will cost them money, $780 million or $2 billion. And now there's talk amongst some lawmakers of trying to soften the blow. One of those possibilities is letting them use state right-of-way and not lease it. So I guess I'm wondering, if A, do you feel there's any need to soften the blow, and B, would you support, or would you guys be trying to oppose letting them use the right-of-way at no cost?
I think Jerry, thanks. I think if Sound Transit can come up with creative ways to find this extra money, which they don't need this money. As the senator said, it's $54 billion that they've got, that they're anticipating bringing in. And the Pelliccotti bill reduces by about $800 million. They can find this money. You know, if they're spending $90 million, is a number I've heard, on office space in Seattle, they can relocate those offices somewhere else. I mean, there's plenty of options here, just like any business in the state. When it has less revenue, it has to figure out how to make itself work and make itself profitable. You know, Sound Transit needs to do exactly the same with the people's money and figure out how to be effective with the dollars they've been allocated. I totally believe they can deliver this, and if they won't, you know they're going to be back here asking for more money, and then we can have the conversation about what are you using it for and how are you spending our dollars.
Do you have bills that are going to go after Sound Transit versus killing ST3?
We have companion bills right now for accountability on the Sound Transit Board, which Senator O'Bannon mentioned earlier. So we'll see how those goes. Again, they're sort of held up right now. That really is where we can have local representation and feedback to those board members and bring extra accountability to the agency.
All good? All right, thanks very much.
Thanks. Thanks for driving down.